thank you for joining us for this collaborative event between the Department of Media and Communication at Örebro University and the Creative Industries Research and Innovation Network here at Oxford Brookes University. I'm very happy that today's topic is hidden labor, women's conditions in the Swedish film industry, and it will be presented by Professor Maria Jansson. Professor Jansson holds a PhD in political science and is a professor of gender studies. Her research interests include women's working conditions and cultural policy. She is also currently a primary investigator of the project representing women, gendering Swedish film culture. And among her recent publications are The Final Cut, Directors, Producers, and the Gender Regime of the Swedish Film Industry, Experiencing Male Dominance in Swedish Film Production, and Representing and Experiencing Motherhood on and off screen in the Swedish Film Industry. And they're published across edited volumes and journals. I am also very happy to introduce the chair to the Q&A of the session, Professor Åsa Kron, also from Örebro University, who specializes in broadcasting practices and new forms of audience address on the web, and most recently, the multimodal design of gambling advertisements and their potential signs of feminization.
Oh, thank you, Maya, and thank you for inviting me. I'm very happy to be here and that there are so many people joining us on this Zoom seminar. So I will talk today about the results from a project which is called Representing Women, Gendering Swedish Film Culture. And I've been working in this project together with colleagues from cinema studies and law. We have collected a rather vast empirical material, and this presentation is based on interviews with women in the film industry. And I conducted these interviews together with cinema studies scholar Louise Wallenberg, who is professor at Stockholm University. I will also present some testimonies from the metoo petition Tystnad tagning, which translates to silence action, which was published in Svenska Dagbladet, one of the major dailies in Sweden, and it was published in November in 2017. So in the project, we have also collected a lot of other materials, which kind of gives a comprehensive picture of the working conditions in the Swedish film industry for women and for men, I would add. So when we started this project, it was a major buzz around the fact that the number of Swedish directors in Sweden had reached the share of 50%. Anna Särner, the woman in the middle in this picture, is the CEO of the Swedish Film Institute, and she was traveling around the world giving talks at various events. And she also launched the 50-50 by 2020 campaign in the Cannes Festival in 2016. So this kind of represents a saga of gender equality success that is well in line with how Sweden likes to present itself as a model country for gender equality. However, the positive international attention there were reports about Sweden taking the lead or Sweden reaching 50-50 in various countries and in various media outlets. But this kind of success that was represented in the international community was combined with gender equality and the gender equality policies of the Swedish Film Institute being questioned in Sweden, resisted, and heavily disputed in the domestic debate. Adding to this, there was also critique from feminist scholars who have problematized this kind of governance feminism, to use Elisabeth Prygel's word. So these scholars were arguing that it might be counterproductive to present the success, because that will lessen the incentives to tend to remaining inequalities. And further, it was argued that providing this picture of a surface gender equality may in fact increase inequalities in, for instance, distribution or other areas that was not as visible. So the general critique about of presenting Sweden as a success story of gender equality is that it kind of produces gender equality in general as a Swedish invention, and it connects gender equality to the identity of being Swedish. So gender equality is the same as Swedishness, and this in turn leads to blaming immigrants for not being gender equal or for being responsible for remaining gender inequalities, leading to what has been called femo-nationalism or homo-nationalism when it comes to accusing immigrants for spreading homophobia. So in this sense, gender equality policies and gender equality, narrating gender equality as a success story is kind of feeding into right-wing populist discourses. So this kind of critique was present at the same time as we saw this huge interest in the gender equality of the Swedish film industry. So we found this situation to be really mind-boggling and intriguing, and a good place to start our investigation of how it actually was to be a woman in the Swedish film industry. A year after Anna Serner presented the 50-50 by 2020, the metoo movement shook Sweden in its grounds, for instance, leading to not presenting the Nobel Prize laureate in literature that year. That has not happened since the Second World War, so it was quite an amazing situation. The metoo movement also revealed the extent of sexual harassment in the film industry. So let's see if I have to change the picture. Yeah. There is something wrong with this picture, but I don't really understand what. Oh, sorry, I have to. So, okay, sorry, you have to watch it like this, so I will read the text to you. So basically, while the share of women directors, scriptwriters, and producers did increase, at least for some years. So while it was 64 women in 2017, there were only 23% women directors in 2017. So it has been varying over the years. And also looking at films like the feature releases in total, we can see that the number of women directors is around 23% rather than the high numbers that we will get if we look only at the films that has received public production support. But at the same time as the Swedish Film Institute were telling this success story, their own statistics also showed that women still had problems working in the industry. So, for instance, not only that it was the number of, or the share of director varied over the years, the film projects with women directors also tended to have lower budgets. So on average, it was 83% of the budget of a film made by a male director during the time period 2013 to 2017. A film with a male main character had on average 33% higher budget than a film made by with men in the main character. And these dots that I hope that you can see the dots. So the dots are representing the collaborations of men film producers who had never worked with a woman in the creative team. And the red dots are collaborations who have never worked with a woman themselves in the creative team. And the purple dots are the men who work with men producers who have worked with women in the creative team. So I think that this picture really shows the extent of gender separation in the film industry, where men tend to work with other men and women work with both men and women. It doesn't show on this picture, but that is how it's how the other diagram, what the other diagrams shows. So 46% of male producers have never worked with a woman in the creative team. So this paradoxical situation then made us a bit curious of how it is to work in the film industry if you are a woman. And since this was a transdisciplinary project, we brought different theories to the project. As a political scientist, I had worked on policies about women's work and on political representation, while my cinema studies colleagues had worked with theories about cultural representation and how women were represented on the screen. So we began to explore how theories of these different theories, I should say, on representation could be combined. So there is a dual meaning of representation, and we started out by thinking about the theories coming from political representation to be about women's presence, which women are actually there, and also how different norms and practices in the film industry conditions their presence in the industry. And on the other hand, we also discussed portrayal, like representation as portrayal, the way that women are represented on screen. And this one is a bit wider than is the most common way of understanding portrayal or women's representation. So our conceptualization of portrayal includes the film in becoming. So when a film is produced, there is always an idea about how this film should be when it's done. There are ideas about authenticity and about the film's audience. And these ideas that are connected to the film as product also influence the conditions for women. So this is a link between presence and portrayal. We started out to look for theories that could speak to this linking between presence and portrayal, and we found many, and I would just mention a few. So bell hooks talks about how filmmakers of color are caught in a double bind, where they are expected to portray the experiences of the group they belong to, while at the same time they have to live up to aesthetic and narrative expectations from a film industry which is based on a white norm. So translating this into gender, we thought this idea of the double bind was something to work with. We also found Karen Boyle's book on the metoo movement, where she argues that actresses are often confused with the roles that they are playing. So these characters that they play are often portrayed as sexually available. And this affects the actual actress's credibility or the actual person's credibility negatively when reporting sexual harassment during the Me Too movement. So the collapsing of borders between the actress and the role that is played was also something that we thought could be productive to work with. Then we also found that Jasper Puar, she has studied the infamous photographs from Abu Ghraib prison, and she studies them as a form of torture including the links between the process of producing the photographs and the photos in themselves. So both the process and the product is important in her reasoning. And no other comparisons, but the thinking about the process and the photograph and how the boundaries are upheld and collapsed between these two was something that we thought would be also interesting to look at. So we use these very different ideas about how presence and portrayal are connected as a theoretical lens to study women's conditions in the Swedish film industry. We were also inspired by feminist production studies, and not least Miranda Banks' discussion about hidden labor. She uses the concept to discuss below-the-line workers and their contribution to the films, as well as how their work or their hidden work is formed by their inferior positionality in the production team. And we found that this concept could also be used to understand how hidden labor that the gender regime gives rise to, given that the gender regime of the film industry positions women as subjected. So we wanted to understand, we were trying to kind of read our material from the viewpoint that women, even though women were not in the below the line occupations, they could also be performing hidden labor because of being women in a film industry based on the male norm. So what we found then was that many women that we interviewed were quite reluctant to talk about themselves as being women or having special conditions because of being women. On the other hand, they were far more open about the strategies they used to counter conditions that we considered were about the gender conditions in the industry. So this methodological insight then led us to ask the women we interviewed about how they managed or what they did on the set in getting funding, etc., etc. So the thing with the extra efforts and work, which I now have called hidden labor, that women do, is that it has to be, it is done without no one really noticing it. And if it doesn't show, it does not exist. But on the other hand, if it would show, it would be a failure. So it's like with the dancer's feet, you know, they do hurt, but it shouldn't show. So women's extra work or the amount of time and effort they put into dealing with the male norm in the film industry, it should not be visible. So this is also something that makes it difficult for women to talk about this, of course, because if they do express it in interviews, they always run the risk of being interpreted as a failure. So when we asked for their strategies and what they did, we found different kinds of invisible work that they performed. So one of the things that we found was that they did a lot of care work on the set. So for instance, Katinka Farago, who worked, started out as a script supervisor and then moved on to be a producer and together with Ingmar Bergman, and she worked on almost all of his productions. And she told us that before going out to start the day's work on the set, he always wanted to sit together with her in a room, and they would sit in silence while she held his hand and kind of soothed him into being able to perform his work. I will not talk about this care work on the set in this talk because I would have way too much to talk about. Women also strategize in different ways to manage the everyday work on the set, and also to manage the work care nexus, that is the private care work that they have to do. And they also sometimes introduce new practices. And this is a strategy that also challenges the practices in the industry. They also put a lot of effort into narrating themselves. So they have to always to negotiate how women are portrayed in public debate, in policy, and on screen. And they also voice their problems, and they organize to change their conditions. And this is something that I will not address in this talk either, but I just want to put it there so that you can see like the amount of work that is being undertaken. So I would like to present a couple of quotes from women describing how their ideas about how they want to depict women on screen has been met by their colleagues in the industry. So Rohta Sekisö's director, she says that when people give feedback on the manuscript, there were many occasions when I thought, would you have asked this question if it was a male character? A lot of times they gave feedback related to understanding the characters emotionally. So in her film, she wanted to present, for instance, certain ideas about women's friendship. And these, the way that she wanted to depict this was considered by her colleagues on the set to be unreasonable, so that people wouldn't understand the film if she depicted women's friendship in this way. And what we, when we started discussing in the project team what was happening here, we saw that when they were questioning her ideas about how to depict these women on screen, they were also questioning her authority, her capacity as a director to decide on, to make decisions that would make the film attractive to the audience. We have a similar story from Lisa Olin, who says that they had such problems understanding that the main female character had had 4 abortions. They had problems with female characters being more complex and contradictory. People are looking for a simple logic in female characters. So both Rohta Sekisö and Lisa Olin argues that women need to be intelligible in a much less complex way than male characters. But this also kind of when they want to present women as more complex and contradictory, this provides problems for them on the set, and they are being questioned, and their authority is being questioned. These occasions, or the problems of making the female representations on screen intelligible to the crew or to the others in the team or to distributors or funders is also a problem for funding films. And Susanne Osten, a very famous director both in film and theater in Sweden, and also known as a feminist. She was also part of the second wave women's movement in Sweden. She tells us about a film that was never was realized. So, and she says, she describes the manuscript that we added a feminist framework. There is an interplay between the historical context and his work. But who wants to watch a film about the Second World War, said my producers. People often say that they don't understand our films. I don't think this problem is in the film design, but in the references. They simply don't understand the topic. And of course, if the funders don't understand the topic, well, then you will not get any money. So these women also kind of reference to an audience that is not the usual audience. They think that there is an audience for their stories and that people want to see these characters, these different characters. So there is also the question if whether they are addressing different audiences, or if the funders and their colleagues who think that women are intelligible if they are complex, perhaps don't know the audience as well as they think they do. So how do women kind of strategize in order to meet these challenges that they meet? Well, they do have a lot of strategies to realize their ideas on the set. So one producer says that she's creating a trusted team, which she calls my film family. Other women tell us that they have accepted lower budgets or consciously asked for lower budgets in order for the funders not to have so much of a say. So there are a lot of women discussing this, saying that they did not provide so much money, so they cannot have so many comments. Another strategy, which is more like on the set, is that I let them think it was their idea, as one director puts it, or they try to convince the crew in other ways. For instance, arguing that let's try this scene, let's just do this, and if it doesn't work, we'll take it out. And then when you have done this, they argue, when you've done the shot, you can always work with it in post-production, and then they have another set of people working with the film. So the interviews have also displayed strategies to maintain authority. And so one woman says, I try to be grumpy, not to smile. Another one says that sometimes when a scene turns out good, I tend to get emotional. Then I often ask the cinematographer to say thank you so that it does not show. And we also have one woman saying, I dress down so that they shall not find me available. So these quotes, they indicate that traits that are considered feminine lessens authority, but it also indicates that being seen as sexually available is a problem on the set. And this kind of links to the testimonies from the metoo movement, which are different in character because they describe harassment and assaults, but they do link to the tendency that women are always in the risk of being seen as sexually available. So this is a story from the metoo petition that was published. And it is a longer story, but part of it goes like this. The male actor, who was 17 years older than I was, would enter and watch my body. The director said that we should both tremble with lust. He was not satisfied with the lust I tried to act as I lay there, afraid and naked. When we were done, he added an extra nude scene, which was not in the manuscript. Later, I received an email from him where he told me that he had dreamt beautiful erotic dreams about me. This story tells us about many gazes that this woman is exposed to. The male actor is the first one. The potential audience is also represented by the camera and by the director's gaze. So as Laura Mulvey has said, there are several gazes that women are exposed to during production and also when the film is screened. But in this story, the director collapses the distinction between production and product, both because he is looking at her, saying what he thinks that the audience will see in this scene. So he says that she has to act as if she's even more horny or something. And then he also collapses another distinction between the production and the product when he emails her that he has had erotic dreams about her. This makes invisible her experience of the production when she was afraid and naked and vulnerable, and making her present only as an actress. So he's kind of collapsing the difference between her and the person that she is impersonating. And all of this can happen because the director believes that the audience will experience the same thing as he does when he is watching. When he's watching the production, the audience will experience the same thing when they watch the film. And there is a strive for some kind of authenticity in this scene as well. So the seemingly male prerogative to decide how and when the boundaries between production and product can be upheld or transgressed is displayed also in another story. And this story is about a woman who refused to do a nude scene and insisted on keeping her underwear on. And they were trying to convince her in various ways, which is also in the story. But this is then what happens when the director collapses the boundary between production and product in order to punish her. So it goes like, I was the only actor on the set, and during the entire day, the director ignored me completely. I asked about guidance, but he refused. He only stared into the monitor, and not once did he look at me. I cried. So this is like, he is acting as if she is not there, as if this is only something that happens on the monitor, and that this is not a production site where they are working together to produce a film, but it actually is he watching her. So this weekend, one of the morning papers in Sweden published an interview with Sofia Kappel, who is starring in the film Pleasure, which is a film about the porn industry. And one of the things that she discussed in the interview was how important it was for her that her co-actors told her that they did not hate her in real life. And this was because she wanted to always remember that it was a production of a movie, not something that really happened. So that what was going on the set was not reality, but the kind of acting out of a scene that would be screened eventually. So when the director in this story from the metoo movement kind of ignores to uphold the difference between the production site and the actual film that is being produced, this is a way that he can punish this woman, and he has like the power to decide whether or not he should acknowledge the situation as somewhere where they are doing something together, where they are producing a film. So in addition to how women are portrayed on screen and how the production of films in their search for authenticity may be experienced as abusive, the debate about women in film also produces portrayals of women. And in Sweden, in the Swedish debate, women are described as whining, they are lazy, they want someone else to help them make movies, they are incompetent, and they make films that will not attract the audience. And this is, these kind of representations of women in the public debate is quite astonishing when you read it. So in order for women to be able to narrate themselves, as Simone de Beauvoir argues, they have to deal with how they are mediated by others. And self-representations can be managed in different ways. So one way is to incorporate other people's descriptions as your own and changing pejorative descriptions into positive. So one film editor that we interviewed, she told us several stories about how like there were a lot of conflicts on the set or in the production, in the post-production, and she said, so I am an annoying little bugger. And that was her way of kind of transforming the descriptions of her into something positive, because she found strength from being an annoying little bugger. Another strategy is to actively work on not caring about how others describe you. So one director says that nowadays, I don't care if they think I am a bitch. And this is a comparison between like from when she was younger, when she did care about this, and when it was really something that she didn't like. There are other possibilities, of course, for self-representation, and these self-representations lead up to a voicing of problems. So one of the women tell us about her experience of meeting with others in a mentorship program that was started by the Swedish Film Institute. And she says that we spoke about things we thought that we were alone in having experienced. It led to awareness about the gender structures in the film industry. So coming to an awareness also made it possible for this woman to write about her experiences and to give voice to these experiences in various ways. So another strand then of hidden labor is to try to combine work with care obligations. And given that this problem is quite upfront in gender equality discussions, not only in Sweden, but in all countries, I think like the issue of how women should combine work with caring obligations is one of the most popular things to discuss. But it is surprisingly absent from the discussions about gender equality in the film industry in Sweden. And in fact, it's more absent from the Swedish discussions about gender equality in the film industries than it is in many other countries. And I think that, and this is only me guessing, one reason for this might be that there is an idea that Sweden have a perfect system for childcare. Almost all children go to preschools from an early age, and that is around 2 years old. So I think that we have like 91% of all 3-year-olds go to preschool in Sweden. However, the film industry has working conditions that go far beyond ordinary childcare possibilities, because women, everyone in the film team are supposed to stay away for long periods of time. The more recent, or it has always been there, but it has been more common recently that films are produced, like Swedish films are produced in Hungary because of tax incentives, etc., which means that not only do you have to stay away from home for a long period of time, but you are also in a different country. And we have also had some women in the interviews have said that they have not been able to use the benefits that actually are introduced in Sweden, for instance, to have shorter working hours when you have young children, etc. So one way of dealing with this was that we heard from Mia Engberg, a producer, and a director, sorry. She was a single mother when she was working on her film Lucky One, and she decided not to let the industry praxis of long working hours, or as she expressed it, working till you puke, should not decide her life. So she told us that she was having a different strategy. So if I have to stand there for 12 hours, there will be no film. So we had to remove some pictures. I borrowed that from Marguerite Duras. She made a black movie because she did not get any money. Haha, she was so punk. We practiced short days on the set, and I introduced that everyone could meditate during the day. So I thought For instance, if you have a disability or bad health, perhaps such stories should also be screened. So this strategy then really challenges the working practices of the industry with the long hours, etc. And it also challenges the idea that creativity can only be achieved if you follow those working practices. On the flip side of this strategy is, of course, a risk for future funding and work opportunities. So when you break the norms, several women have told us stories about how they have been warned that going ahead with the project will ruin their careers, either because of the content of the film or because of their breaking with industry norms of production, funding, or distribution. So we have people who have distributed films regardless of the holdback time. We have women who have funded, used crowdfunding, and also like Mia Engberg, challenging the ways that production is normally done. So to summarize then, I would argue that the gender regime of the Swedish film industry uses masculinity as an organizing principle. And the male ideal, or the masculinity ideal that it is organized around, is the one of the genius director. And they are like engendered in Sweden by Ingmar Bergman and Vilgot Sjöman. Two geniuses which we know from our stories and from other stories are not very easy to work with, or they were not very easy to work with. But having a male norm or a masculinity as an organizing principle means that the working practices and the norms of the industry benefits those who can live up to the ideal, which is of course easier for men because they are men. But it also means that if you are not able to live up to this ideal, you need to negotiate it in relation to your own work and your own person and being in the industry. And the idea of the genius director was a guiding principle of Swedish film policy when it was instituted in the 1960s. And as an anecdote, I presented at an event at the Swedish film industry, and a man came up to me afterwards and said that he had been in the admitting committee of the film school that started in 1964. And he said, "You're absolutely right when you say that this was to produce a new generation of Ingmar Bergman. I was in the committee, and we always asked the candidates if they had a horrible upbringing or a horrible childhood." So that was one of the criteria to get into the film school. The male genius is also a general idea of how creative work is often undertaken or understood. You work until you puke, and this is the single voice that kind of produces art. It produces authority as something that men have and women don't have as much of. And it also kind of produces the right for men to decide when to uphold, transgress, or collapse the distinction between production and film. And it leads to that women have to narrate themselves in relation to how they are narrated by others. So I think this is what I have told you now is only part of what we have found, but I think that this is something that it would be interesting to work on even further and see, also see if it can be, if it's similar in other countries and other parts of the film industry and other parts of cultural industries. And thank you very much for listening to me.
Well, thank you, Maria, for this fantastically interesting talk, and depressing as well, in a sense. And it certainly showed the other side of the 50-50 film industry coin in a very interesting and exposed way. And now we have about 15 minutes for questions, and I'll try to moderate, but I think that Kingsley is first to raise his hand. So please go ahead and pose your question.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much for this wonderful presentation. And also, I'm appreciating the organizers for putting this up. I'm in Nigeria, and we have a film industry which is known as Nollywood. What you have presented is similar to what I'm working on. I'm working on a female Nollywood directors and value/citizens reorientation towards good governance. I'm a PhD research student in Lancaster University. Now, what you said is exactly what Nigerian film industry is facing. But I have two issues that I want to find out, especially relating to portrayal and presence. Yes, first and foremost, I will say women will first make themselves available. They will first present themselves in as much as there are other bias issues facing them, like Nigeria, the patriarchal situation there, the cultural values there, and the families. These are some issues that try to put the women back. But certainly, most Nigerian women, they've taken it as a bold step and have been doing greatly in the film industry internationally. Then the issue of portrayal. Film is seen to me as a mirror of the society. And most of the film produced in Nigeria in the early days, they portray Nigeria as a country in a negative light, which many people were questioning, that Nigeria was shown as a voodoo nation and other issues. Yes, some person practice this, but in the transnational issue, this thing has been taken to other parts of the country, and we have seen Nigeria in that negative light, beyond the positive aspect which Nigeria is being mirrored. It is the same thing. Most of these things presenting women as maybe a wife trophy, as maybe weak, or looking for who to support them, or materialistic. Yes, sometimes these things happen, or they have been in existence in our society. And the filmmaker, as a mirror of the society, try to portray this. How can we balance the reality to the creative aspect of a film in making a balance between the portrayal and what is being practiced in the society?
It's a very difficult question. So I think your research sounds very, very interesting. It would be really interesting to have a conversation about what you have found in Nigeria. How can we kind of balance production and portrayal? So I think that one difference between that I didn't mention, perhaps I should, between like Nollywood and the Swedish film industry is that like Sweden, like most European states, have public have public support for filmmaking, whilst Nollywood, for instance, is it's a commercial system. And when you do have like public funding, there is also the consideration of the arm's length principle, which means that politicians can pay for films, but they shouldn't interfere in what is portrayed on screen. And I think that is part of why gender equality policies in all European countries, and also in Canada and New Zealand and Australia, kind of deals with the number of women rather than the content of films. But then we do have a link between like the number of women and the content of films. But I think that what our research has shown is that it is more difficult to portray women in different ways, because like in the 70s and 80s, the Swedish women's movement, they were, they thought that only women can make films. Oh, we will have totally different portrayals of women. But that didn't happen. And I think that our research also shows something about that there are norms about how to portray women that does not they don't go away because there are more women behind the camera. So I think that is like balancing the norms of how to portray people which reside in the film industry and among the audience as well, is something that is crucial in order to actually achieve some kind of gender equality. But it's like that's the $1,000 question, how to achieve that.
Thank you, Kingsley and Maria. We have 4 questions waiting in the chat. Åsa Järnlund wonders whether you have had any response from the industry or representatives from the industry to your results.
We have had responses from the Swedish Film Institute, and they think that we are a bit unfair to their policies, of course. But they also think some of our results, I think they believe that they also can use to improve conditions, of course. But from people in the industry, not so much. The women that we have interviewed have read all our outputs so far, and they will we will give them the opportunity to read whatever we write. Some of them are very positive, others are not so interested. So it's a bit of a mixed response, I should say.
Thanks. Silvia Di Beltulo wonders if you could tell us a little bit more about the collection and analysis of the data from the Swedish metoo.
So that is something that, because initially the project should only cover the period up until 2016, because that was there was a major change in film policy in January 2017 in Sweden. But so I have collected the petitions and also the responses and the debates about the petitions, but I have not collected any of the material from that kind of deals with the general resistance against the metoo movement, for instance, in Sweden. But there are other projects, research projects working specifically on the metoo movement. The analysis of this, so what I presented now was an analysis of how I used the stories from the metoo movement to say something about the conditions in the industry and the mechanisms or the dynamics behind what gives rise to these kind of stories. What is it that happens in these stories? So that is one analysis that I have done, but I also, so in Sweden there has been a lot of organizing around Me Too, not only the petitions and the Facebook site or the websites and the social media, but also like women who have kind of started this and they have collected all the stories and they have worked together between different petitions and different Me Too hashtags. So that is work that I want to do in the future, but I haven't done yet.
Thanks. Daniela Gennari wonders if you could tell a little bit about the labor below the line work. Did you work with this section of the industry, and what has it revealed, she wonders?
That's a very good question, and that is also something that is unfortunately lacking in our project. So we when we started off, we were influenced by the way that that gender equality is presented, and the interviews have been mostly with above the line workers, but also with some below the line workers. And the thing with like the gender equality work is that first it is only about like the professional film industry. So that is an exclusion of everyone who's doing films, for instance, on YouTube. Second, that it has in Sweden, it has been dealing only with the creative positions, which means that we have no statistics or data like on an aggregated level on anything about the below the line workers, which is of course a problem with the gender equality policies. The interviews that we have done with people with women working below the line have revealed pretty much the same problems as for those women above the line. But we have not yet had done the analysis of like what the hierarchy within the team, how we can see that in the interview. So we have a huge material and we will continue to work on that.
Thanks. Krista, you've made 2 separate points in the chat. Do you want to tell them yourself or should I?
No, I can.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Hi, Maria. It's really interesting and yes, depressingly familiar, I think, because so many of the things you were saying, I think apply across the board. They certainly apply in British industry, they certainly apply, I think, in a lot of American industry. Yeah, I made 2 points. I mean, one is I'm quite interested in what you might call a sort of psychosocial work of just, it's something I've become aware of just being female in the industry. I think carries and your Balish's analogy I thought was very good, because I have a sort of image in my head that for every woman doing a job in the industry, there's a man standing beside her who is doing less work, because he's not having to do a whole bunch of psychosocial work to just preserve his identity and not get groped. You know, those 2 things actually represent a real draw on resources. A person only has so many resources, and that preservation of safety, there's a sort of psychosocial concept of safety, and just keeping oneself safe and whole represents an awful lot of expenditure of energy. And that's an expenditure of energy that a male peer isn't making in order to be in the same place. And I think that's something that we don't really take account of. I think that's quite an important concept, which I want to do something with. But, you know, and a lot of what you were saying absolutely spoke to that. And it's whether it's at the level of the metoo or whether it's at a much lower level, but it's just there all the time. And the other point I just made there in the chat is that, you know, I mean, absolutely agree about this thing that just using female filmmakers still draw on the same cultural norms, and therefore the representation of women does not automatically entirely reform itself because you've got female filmmakers. But I think there's some really is it Armberg? I don't know. Mara Lawson doesn't also Stacey Smith. Those big American universities that do those big macro studies of representations of women and how many female speaking parts there are in the top 100 box office films. You know, those studies do show a real correlation with the number of female directors and the proportion of female speaking parts. And whether that's actually a correlation because both are responding to a sort of point in culture, or whether there's any causality, I think you have to be careful of. Kind of for the reasons you said, but nevertheless it is the case. So on that kind of macro level, there's a difference, and I think there is a strong suggestion that it's not instant, it's not simple, that it does make a difference to representations in the end at scale if you have more women behind the camera. So it is, you know, I just think it's such an incredibly important thing because film is such an important part of our cultural lives. So, you know, I think, as you say, not a simple correlation, but I think there is a correlation and it is important. It's something we have to hang on to just because you can't read it across in every single instance. So those are my 2.
Yeah. Well, I absolutely agree with you. There is a correlation, and there are like these measures also from the Swedish Film Institute set. So, and of course, there are many more women in lead characters if you have like a woman as director or scriptwriter. So that there's definitely that kind of correlation. One thing that is, I think that there is another contributing factor to the fact that we see more women on screen also, and that we see women in new roles on screen. And this has also been discussed in the theories that kind of label themselves post-feminism. the discussion about post-feminism, so that women are depicted differently, but in very specific ways. So there are also like the complexities are still lacking. So, you know, women can be self-sufficient and active, but there are other things that are still missing. But I'm all the way with you. I think you are absolutely correct that there is it is an important connection between what is screened and who is doing the work behind the camera.
And if I could just say, I think volume matters a lot, because the number of women on screen matters, because the more women on screen, the less the burden of representation every single female representation bears for somehow standing for an entire gender. And that itself is quite important, isn't it?
We're running a few minutes over, but Maya said that's fine. I was wondering whether your interviewees were hesitant at all at being open about their hidden labor, or in fear of being more of a whining bitch.
Yeah, I think
now
so.
in research.
Some of them were actually, but some of them were because we decided that when we are writing like the critique against the film industry, we're not using names, as you've seen here. I've used names sometimes, but not always, and that is to somehow protect them as individuals. But that was like I think that some of our interview participants are happy that we don't use their names always, but some of them, and especially the older women that we have interviewed, they want to have credit for what they are saying, so they are not afraid. And that might also be because they are the senior women, they are retired, some of them. It's not so much a stake for them as it is for the younger women. So we have been a bit cautious about this, and they have been very reluctant to say that they are feminists, and they have also always tried to kind of, most of them have tried to moderate when they say something that is obviously an inequality, a gender inequality. They have very often been moderating it, saying that, well, that it goes for everyone in the film industry. Everyone has difficulties getting funding or things like that. So there has been a certain reluctance to talk about it. But at the same time, this is outweighed by, I think, that they want to tell us about what they have been doing. Because they have been working so hard, and so little of the work that filmmakers do is actually visible on screen. So I think that there is like, they want to present, they want to tell us about their work.
Okay, I see no more questions in the chat. And I don't know, Maya, do you want to round off?
Oh, I think it's been... Oh, sorry. Just thank you for having me once more.
We thank you.